Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Good Path Podcast. Today, we are going to be talking with Pastor Dave Funk, who is the lead pastor of Abbotsford Pentecostal Assembly, which is also the church where I am currently on staff as a pastor. Dave has a master's degree in leadership from the University of Victoria and an undergraduate degree in theology from our shared alma mater, Summit Pacific College. Shout out to Summit. Woo woo. And Dave's been a pastor for over 20 years. Has a wealth of leadership experience, and I recently had a conversation with him on the topic of servant leadership. I think this is an important topic today as we see so many different visions of what leadership should look like, not only in the church, but especially in the church. Our model for spiritual leadership was Jesus himself, who was the servant of all. And I appreciate Dave's heart and skill as a shepherd, to use a biblical metaphor. As he leads our team of pastors and staff, he prioritizes people over power and relationships over results. For me, Dave's an example of what it looks like to take a good path in leadership and create a culture of goodness in our church. So we talk a bit about what makes leadership and organizations great. And I just love how Dave points us to Christlikeness as the focal point for all of that. So without any more spoilers or further ado, I really hope you enjoy this conversation with Pastor Dave Funk. Hey, Dave. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Good to be here in your office. And the commute was easy for this one.
Yeah, not too bad.
I want to talk about servant leadership today.
Mm-hmm.
You've done some teaching in our church on this topic. You're a trusted voice on this issue, and I work with you, so I can vouch for your...
That's kind of my concern. I'm going to talk like an expert, and you're here to tell people otherwise.
Well, I think in your sermon that you preached on servant leadership, you gave some disclaimers about how you're still a work in progress, like we all are.
Yeah.
But yeah, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your history with studies and your experience in leadership and how you have taken some time to focus on this specific topic.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Chad. This is a fun topic for me to talk about, and it's not just academics, but it's real life, and that's what is so cool about it. And it's even more than just like trying to be a successful person. It's what I think Jesus models for us, and whether you're an official leader in an organization or a regular Joe or Jill, servant leadership is something we can all pursue. But for me, certainly grew up, feeling a sense of calling and leadership in my life, and God opening doors, whether I was looking for them or not, and lots of different things, everything from sports to student council stuff to all kinds of things, being a leader. And after becoming a pastor, I'm obviously skipping ahead. You don't need my whole bio, but was looking into continuing my education and looked at different things like seminary or other master's programs, and looked at a leadership studies program at the University of Victoria, and saw that they really emphasized servant leadership. And that just really triggered my heart and my interest. And so registered for that and got to study under some great teachers and read some great material, and really found it's kind of like a where have you been all my life kind of stuff, where it really triggered something that was deep in my heart about the kind of leader I aspire to be. And as we said before, like it's a work in progress, and no one's perfect, and fail regularly. But there's something about the model Jesus presented and this philosophy of leadership that's so attractive to me.
Right. So it's also largely connected to your faith as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, a pastor. We'll get to some of that, but there's a bit of a history to this specific term, servant leadership, right? That we'll get to how that goes way back to Jesus's teachings in a time where leadership was anything but. There was no paradigm for that before. But you have studied a little bit of the more recent history of the term servant leadership.
Yeah, it's quite a modern, actually, approach to leadership, relatively speaking, when you think about leadership kind of philosophies or theories. But it started by a guy named Robert Greenleaf. I'm losing my dates, but in the 70s. And he was like a mid-level executive at AT&T, just kind of worked a regular management job, and was, saw lots of different models of leadership in those days and felt like there was a better approach. But just a regular guy. He was a Quaker, so he had a Christian faith along with that. But he actually read a novel that inspired him. He didn't attribute his approach to Jesus. Later, he made the connections, but it was a novel called Journey to the East by a guy named Herman Hesse. And it was a story about this expedition. A group went out on this expedition, and a member of the group was a guy named Leo, who was doing the dishes. He was cleaning up the camp. He was doing all the odd jobs that no one else wanted to do. And while Leo was there, the expedition was very successful. But at a certain point in the narrative, Leo disappeared. Nobody knew what happened to Leo. And with him not being there to serve the needs of the others on the expedition, everything fell apart. Like the stuff no one wanted to do wasn't getting done. And the whole goals of the expedition fell apart. So for him, he just recognized that it wasn't so much about who was in charge, who was casting the vision or who was blazing the trail. But if nobody's willing to do the gritty work, the hard work that nobody else is willing to do, doesn't matter how great of a quote unquote leader or an adventurer is leading the way. If nobody's serving, things aren't happening.
If no one's like cooking a hot meal for all these people who are doing all of this exploration and whatnot, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from there, he just like, as he's kind of like hitting, retirement and leaving AT&T, he wrote an essay in 1970 called The Servant as Leader, and very intentionally placing the word servant before leader, because for him, servant leadership had very little to do with leadership. In fact, a servant leader is not someone who aspires to be a leader. A servant leader is someone who desires to serve, and out of their service, they end up becoming a leader. So leadership is secondary to service, which is primary. And so it's one of those things where, you find yourself loving and encouraging and supporting people, and they say, hey, can you lead us? Can you, there's something about you that's empowering us, that's helped us to thrive, that's helped us to grow. And so we're going to actually, it's not that you're exerting authority over us. We're actually going to give you authority so that we can actually empower you back to serve us and love us and bless us and help us thrive even more.
Right.
That's more the trajectory of servant leadership.
Yeah, that feels really holistic and healthy. It's not that you have to be either a natural born leader with a desire to do it or this sort of like hesitant sort of like who me kind of thing. But we're discovering that that's more nuanced maybe than we see in a lot of organizations or kind of the way people think about leadership.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people think about leadership and you think about the type A C-suite executive who's domineering and has a vision and better get on board with the vision or find another organization to be a part of. And they work 90 hours a week and, what they say goes, right. And that's a caricature. I know.
Yeah.
But that's actually even with the data that comes out of organizational leadership, that's not the kind of leadership that actually works. So Greenleaf's work, his hope wasn't to quantify it. In fact, he didn't call it a leadership theory. He called it a leadership philosophy. So it wasn't meant to be quantified, but as people do, they've, studies have looked at organizations where people are more servant oriented. So think of Jim Collins and his Good to Great material. He found that, he scaled leaders, level 5 leaders, top level leaders. The quality that was most unique about them that was missing in other leaders was humility. Of all things, you would think it's drive or passion or the willingness to do whatever it takes. But for him, the greatest leaders actually showed the greatest humility, which is a trait of a servant leadership, a servant leader, not a type A, bulldozing kind of leader.
Well, that's definitely very counterintuitive to, I think a lot of times, I mean, in my own personal life, I never imagined being a leader, right? Until somebody said, hey, can you lead this? And so I can attest to that sort of dynamic of well, I'm not like that, but I can help.
Yeah.
I can see a need and try to meet it. Right. And I feel like that's kind of what you're talking about, serving, seeing something that needs to be done and being well, this seems like this will serve everybody, as opposed to what are some of the other ways people look at it?
Yeah. I mean, I think a big red flag for me is someone who really, really wants to lead, someone who really, really wants a position. And so like you're saying, it wasn't so much I want to lead or want to be in charge, but it's here's a way I can use my gifts. Servant leadership isn't, and humility isn't about devaluing what you have to offer, but it's really in sober judgment, knowing what you do have to offer and being willing to use it, not for your own gain, but to serve and bless someone else. And so when I see people who really, really want a position so that they can have this opportunity, that to me is a bit of a red flag. It's fine to have ambition. It's fine to have drive. Those aren't bad things. But I even think about for those of you who aren't aware, like I pastor Abbotsford Pentecostal Assembly, and this was a job that I didn't want. It wasn't something I was ambitious for, but really eventually through wrestling with God, like, felt a calling to come because God helped me see that what I had to offer could serve this community.
Yeah.
But I feel like that in hindsight, I go, oh, that's kind of what qualified me for the role. Like I didn't want it. I wasn't pursuing. I didn't see it as some sort of promotion or opportunity, because that just starts to get into your heart and create a darkness there that can spread into other things. But the desire to serve and to use what I have wherever God places me, but then that opens doors for leadership opportunities.
Sure. Yeah, I guess there's like a paradigm of like the corporate ladder, where it's like, if I do this, then it'll position me to do this, to this. Do you think that's inherently wrong, or in antithesis to servant leadership?
I think it's just something that servant leaders don't think about that much.
Right.
Like it's not bad to get promoted. It's not bad to even, build your resume.
Yeah.
But like so many things, especially so many things Jesus teaches about, like what's in your heart right now. Like, like we're going to get to Jesus in a minute, but I think so much about following Jesus is about doing what he's asked you to do, and then trusting him to put you in the right positions of authority or influence that's going to give you the opportunity to continue to follow him with all the ways that he's blessed and gifted you.
That reminds me, maybe we can move over to the Jesus as kind of a teaching example.
Yeah.
That reminds me of Philippians chapter 2, where Paul says that we should emulate Jesus, who didn't consider his deity as something to be grasped onto, like with this tight grip, but rather we shouldn't have any selfish ambition, but we should emulate him who became servant of all. Yeah.
Yeah. And that, Paul's presenting Jesus as the model for all of us.
Yeah.
And certainly for leaders. So like you think about that passage as it flows through, like Jesus, who is in very nature God. So like we talk about the pursuit of like having it all, right? Like Jesus literally had it all, right? Like he had deity, he had all authority, all power, all influence, everything you could possibly want. But he actually looked at that and didn't consider that as potent to bring transformation to the world and the people he loved as serving them. So he actually, instead of using all the authority and power, he set that aside and took on the nature of a servant and went as low as you can possibly go by washing people's feet, even the person who would later betray him, and dying on a cross and being buried in a grave. That he found more potent to bring transformation to the world he loved than using his power and influence. And he did that as a great act of trust in his Father, right? So he didn't do it so that he could then gain a position. He did that as a great act of trust. And then it says at the end, therefore, God gave him the name that is above every other name. So I think, when you, like, people who aren't Christians can be servant leaders to a degree, but I think a Christian who believes in a God who raises the dead and can elevate the lowly is able to have a spiritual resource for servant leadership that no one else can, because I can just serve, I can just give, I can just love and not have to gain something from it, because I know that God is trustworthy to put me in whatever position he wants me in, whatever position is going to be best for me and for the people that I can serve. And I don't have to worry about quote unquote climbing the corporate ladder. I'm going to serve, and God will put me there if he wants me to be there.
Yeah. Right. So it's like an element of faith that even though this doesn't appear to be the most efficient way to get things done, aka exert authoritarian sort of lording over, where that intuitively seems like that's the way to get things done.
Right.
But rather influencing people toward the best outcomes for everyone. What do you think what are you trying to do as a servant leader with your people? What is, obviously it's contextual. You're in a church, other people are in businesses or whatever. But is there sort of a general kind of like preferred outcome with servant leadership?
Yeah. I mean, you go back to Greenleaf's, philosophy, and for him, it was all about people. It was putting people first. And like, there's different terms for different types of leadership. So you could have You can have a more transactional leadership where it's like, if you're my subordinate, I'll give you what you need and what you want in exchange for you producing better outcomes for my organization.
Right.
Right. Yeah. That's not inherently wrong.
Sure.
But servant leadership, in contrast to that, is I'm going to seek to fulfill your highest priority needs. And it's not because I want to get something from you. It's because the end goal is your flourishing, right? So my goal as a leader is not that my organization gets better, and that's why I treat people nice so that my organization gets better. My goal as a leader is to love and serve people so that people can thrive, so that people can flourish, so that they can grow and mature. When Greenleaf, like he actually didn't give a real working definition of servant leadership. So a lot of people have kind of taken his work and run from there. But the closest thing, he kind of gives is the test of whether you're actually leading as a servant. And really his test basically in summary was like, are the people you're serving doing better than before you were serving them? Are they thriving? Are they maturing as people? Because again, the whole point is meeting their highest priority needs. Now, again, you need to have some potential correction or some nuance, because meeting someone's needs isn't always just, doing whatever they want. Sometimes someone's highest priority need, like sometimes your kid's highest priority need is a correction, right? Yeah. Is a stern talking to, whatever it is, right? And so there's a lot of discernment that comes there and what's needed in the moment. But the end goal is not a better organization. The end goal is healthier people. And again, more modern quantification of servant leadership has shown that will translate into a healthier organization.
Yeah. You alluded to how there's been research done into these businesses who practice this and see better returns and better productivity, even though that's not necessarily where they're putting all of their eggs into that basket, but they're putting them into people. And it feels like there's like kind of a modern sense of like, well, let's give our people benefits. Let's like Starbucks, right? When you're leading in our church, what are you thinking about in terms of helping our staff become the best kind of version of themselves?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, everybody's different. And that's the thing, is like, you can't treat everybody the same. Even with my kids, like sometimes they talk about things being unfair because this kid or that kid got something different.
They need different things at different times.
You need different things at different times, and they're younger and they have these challenges that you didn't have or whatever. And so for staff, it's similar. Like I know some staff, like there's times where they need me to be super direct. And other staff, like when I'm too direct, like they start to like feel really insecure, and I need the wisdom to know that, right? People need to be listened to. People need to, it's not just about their work productivity or how well they're doing as a staff member, but it's how they're doing as a person that like I need to focus on first. And I find often like if I just like care about someone and ask how they're doing, and then it's really easy to be like, hey, can we also talk about like what happened at work last week, or can we talk about this goal that hasn't been accomplished yet? And that out of more of a relationship and more out of like a place of understanding and feeling cared for, like it's a lot easier conversation.
Sure. So I think deep down, everybody wants to be effective and productive in their work, right? Like nobody really enjoys feeling like I'm coasting or I'm mediocre, right? So there's that good medicine of like, hey, let's help you be the best you can be. And
I grew up playing sports. I love to win. But as a coach, I think back on like the best coaches I had and what sport did for me is like sport, ultimately, no offense to any of the girls who are listening, they're probably not, probably none of them are going to be professional volleyball players. So like, that's not what I'm trying to develop. I'm trying to help them grow as people. I'm trying to help them like build relationships and develop social skills and develop healthy habits. So like by coaching them and by even to call them to a high standard in their work ethic, I'm actually helping fulfill a need, right? So I'm still taking that approach as a servant leader to say, hey, you getting better at volleyball and being more coachable in this moment, or even, running a couple laps, because of this or that happened. I'm trying to serve you, not me. I'm not trying to fill some ego and live vicariously through 13-year-old girls winning a volleyball game.
Yeah. Which can happen. So like, getting back to Jesus and his life and teachings, like how does Greenleaf, you were saying, didn't really necessarily attribute his philosophy to the teachings of Christ, but it seems like a really clear connection. How do you see this in Jesus and his teaching in a way that shows us like the heart of God for us as wanting the best for us?
Yeah, like, I mean, I think the clearest teaching Jesus gives on this, Mark 9, he kind of interrupts his disciples on the road, and they're having a conversation, which he knows good and well what they're talking about, but he asks them, what are you talking about? And they're kind of embarrassed and sheepish. And, they admit that they were arguing about who was the greatest, right? So they use this word great. And, you can import a lot of things into that word. What is greatness? What does it mean to be great? And so Jesus then redefines the word greatness, right? Do you want to be great? You're going to be a servant. Do you want to be first? You're going to be slave of all. And then the next chapter, he brings it back up, and he says his kind of like concluding thought, and the big payoff is the Son of Man, i.e. him, came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. So that was his call and his example for them to follow in his footsteps, that they're not to pursue greatness in the eyes of the world. He says, listen, the Gentile rulers, you're subjects of Rome. Even the Jewish rulers who are, puppets of Rome, they're exerting authority. They're using their position to gain something from the people that they're leading. But he says, it's not going to be like that with you guys. If you're going to be a follower of Jesus, if you're going to be my follower, you're going to pursue greatness in a different way. And greatness is then defined as serving. So greatness is not defined by how many people serve you, but greatness is defined by how many people you serve. And Jesus says, the greatest of all, he doesn't say this directly, but by implication, the greatest of all is him who came to give his life as a ransom for many. And that's why you connect it back to that Philippians passage. Therefore, he was given the name above every name, because he was the servant of every single person. And so that just if you actually take that to heart and think through those words and what it actually means, you think about leaders in history, you literally have the name Alexander. His nickname was Alexander the Great. And why do you think he was even that name? Was it because he was the servant of all? Was it because Alexander was the slave of many? No, they gave him that nickname because he conquered a massive empire when he was 30 or something like that. He killed thousands, maybe millions of people. He was powerful. He had influence. He had authority. That's what made him great in the eyes of the world. But for Jesus, greatness is the completely opposite. It's how can you serve? How can you give yourself up for the sake of many, not taking from the many to make yourself something more.
Wow. So not using people as a means to your end.
Yeah.
Is what I'm hearing. We were at a conference last year.
Right.
And one of the speakers was talking about pastors and assuring everyone that God was going to bring people to their church who would fulfill their vision for him. And we joke about a lot because that really irritated me.
Yeah.
And caused me to get riled up a bit. But yeah, just the notion that as a pastor or any kind of leader, the people in my church or in my organization exist because of something that I need, as opposed to something that we all need, right? And I think every good leader can see that, right? How do we win together, but how do we get better together? How do we do something together that benefits us, but hopefully maybe is beneficial to other people out there, whether you're providing a product or service. But even on a team, even if we don't have wild success in winning or accomplishment, we're still doing something because of the way we're leading. It's not a zero-sum thing, because there's so much happening within the relationships.
Yeah.
And you see that in good, the Toronto Blue Jays last year.
Right.
They got to the very end and were a couple plays away from winning the World Series. But at the end of the day, they lost.
Yeah.
But man, all you heard about after was how much those guys loved each other.
Right.
And how much they supported each other, and how they had built this family that was hugely impactful and meaningful, way beyond their success as a team. And I think there's something to that is really important for us.
Yeah, I think you're what are you trying to build? What if you want to build something that lasts? It's going to be how you impact people's lives, how you make them feel when they're hurting or struggling, or when they're celebrating, like mourning with those who mourn, rejoicing with those who rejoice. It's not going to be that you built the biggest organization, the biggest church with the most attendance, coolest environment, but have you really impacted people's lives? Have you really helped them experience God and be transformed? Obviously, again, I'm talking specifically from a pastor's perspective, but that to me is the legacy I want to leave behind, rather than, wow, he was a great preacher and, his church grew really large.
Yeah.
I want people to experience God, which I think is their absolute greatest need, that they would know God. Jesus says that's the definition of eternal life. And so how can I serve and give and bless in a way that does that? And sometimes that aligns with things that people see as like, leadership tactics and strategy, and all those things are needed as a servant leader, but you're going to come out of those things with a completely different heart and intention, specifically to build up the person rather than the organization.
Yeah. It seems like a much more nuanced and layered understanding of leadership, of flourishing. Yeah. You look like you had something to say there.
I mentioned preaching, and I think, again, that's one of those, preaching is weird. If you've ever stood on stage for hundreds of people to listen to you, whether it's preaching or public speaking in general, it can do weird things to you. And I think any sort of platform a person has, there's so many temptations toward pride, and ego, and, famous people often, they break down because their character can't just can't uphold the weight of the platform they have. And that can even happen as a pastor, and your church starts to grow and people say you're a great preacher, whatever it is. And so I really have to remind myself that even in preaching, I need to have an attitude of a servant. And it actually comes back to one of the things, probably the kind of primary factor, I think, of servant leadership. And Greenleaf talked about it. Further, other servant leadership gurus talked about the premier skill, the number one most important skill of a servant leader is listening. And that's not something that if you went to a college program and said, what's the most important skill of a leader? They're probably not going to say listening. But I've meditated on that a lot, and it actually has shaped my whole philosophy of leadership. And I struggle with it because I'm a talker. But when I am a good listener, I'm such a better leader. I am such a better servant. I'm such a better husband. I'm such a better father. And the way it works is like this. If I'm focused on leading, strategizing, running an organization, but I'm not with people, I'm not caring for people, I'm not understanding people's greatest needs, I get up and preach something that I think people need, but I'm doing it out of my own head and not out of care for the sheep. I'm not doing it out of an actual love for the people God has placed in my area of influence. And so if I haven't listened to God, if I haven't listened to people, then I have no idea what I'm talking about. And I haven't even properly positioned myself to serve them. People aren't going to feel loved by someone who isn't listening to them. And I think about this even theologically, or, as a Pentecostal. When you look at the church in the early days of Acts, the day of Pentecost comes and God's Spirit comes, and the people experience the Spirit. They're speaking in tongues. They come outside. People are like, what's going on? And Peter quotes Joel's prophecy, where God says that there'll come a day where I'll pour out my Spirit on all people. Sons and your daughters will prophesy. Old men will dream dreams. Young men will see visions. And this idea that God's Spirit is actually poured out on all believers. So there's this whole new paradigm in the New Testament, that the Spirit that King David had as the primary leader of Israel, but nobody else really had that Spirit. The Spirit that Moses had, nobody else had that Spirit. In fact, Moses said, I wish you would pour out your Spirit on everybody. Now that's true. So as a pastor, as a leader, I'm not Moses. The whole idea isn't that I go up the mountain and get the vision and then go tell people what God said. But the reality is everybody actually has the ability to hear from God. And God's going to speak uniquely to individuals, but I think he also speaks corporately to a church. He doesn't speak just to the pastor, who then relays the message. And so it's not me going up the mountain, then coming back and saying, all right, everybody, this is the vision. This is where we're going as a church. Now get on board or go find another church, right? But if I'm serving well, one of the ways that I can best discern God's voice is actually by listening to the Spirit-filled people of God. God's going to speak to me personally as well.
Yeah.
But if I'm listening well, like there's people who've attended APA for 70 years, and God had been speaking to APA for over 100 years before I ever showed up. So for me to show up and say, I know what's best, I've heard from God, like is so arrogant and so ignorant. So how am I going to discern what God's been saying? I'm going to listen.
Yeah.
And there are times that I have to bring correction or redirection or whatever as the pastor. But if I'm listening well, I'm going to hear God's voice in prayer meetings as I hear people pray, in counseling meetings as I hear their struggles.
And that takes time.
That takes time.
Yeah.
That takes being with the sheep.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I've often reflected on people who say like that pressure, if you're like putting your name in to be the pastor of a church, like, well, what's your vision for our church?
Right.
It's like, I don't know. What do I know about your church?
Yeah.
You know? So like, it's like a doctor meeting a patient who then comes to them as, what's your vision for my health, when the doctor has no idea what their health situation is like. It's like, well, how am I supposed to know what you need?
Yeah.
Or what is best for you until I get to know you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I have my leadership approach to things that I will obviously bring to an organization that I lead.
Yeah.
But as far as like where we're going to go as an organization, where we're going to go as a people, that's a process that we need to like collaborate together with.
Yeah.
And spend some time. It's not so much something that is like introduced or announced. It's something that's discerned together. It's a spiritual process.
Yeah. And before I got here, you'd done a bunch of that work with this church in discerning some values and some mission items. That's great. Dave, I don't know if you can speak to this, but right about the time that you and I were going into ministry, like we graduated around the same time from Bible college, I remember feeling at that time, and maybe you can relate, I don't know, but it was sort of like a moment where like leadership books and leadership speakers and pastors, like leadership was like a really big theme. It's really popular, a lot of hype. Bill Hybels and like you mentioned, Jim Collins and John Maxwell. And sort of that was a lot of what pastors were reading. And I remember being like, okay, I'm trying to get up to speed here. But I just finished Bible college where a lot of the focus was on following Jesus and helping people follow Jesus, not about being leaders. And so I just remember feeling a little bit of disequilibrium going, well, what about following? Isn't that like really important? And I don't know if you ever experienced that or what you'd say to that. Like, aren't leaders, like if we're all just leading, you know, where are we getting our leadership from?
Right.
I don't.
Yeah. I mean, Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ, right? So there's a sense in which like you're setting the example of what a follower should look like. And that's leading, is following well.
Right.
And so again, not having that ambition to be in charge or everybody look at me, but especially as a Christian leader, like ultimately I want people to look at Jesus, and hopefully they can see Jesus through their observance of my life and my example. But, you know, like when it comes to me following Jesus, like it's not about the authority that I have, the position I have. Like my authority doesn't come from my position. Like there is certain quote unquote power that comes from being a pastor. But my hope is I don't have to like lean into that to strong arm people into doing what I want them to do. But my authority comes from God. And it's not an authority in the sense of, now I have power. It's actually, it's a performance of service. I even think about, you know, we don't need to get too deep into political stuff, but even when we think about a biblical view of politics and power when it comes to the state, if you have a atheistic worldview, like the most powerful actor in the world is the state, right? And so that's why you have people who are just like, they, you know, basically worship the state, like freak out when their person doesn't get elected because the world has ended. Christians don't have to fear that as much, but you know, but God holds the state accountable because he does give authority to prime ministers and presidents and emperors, but their authority is not in their position, but they're called to that position to perform a service, right? And if more politicians understood, leaders of every level understood that they're there to serve the people God has placed under their care, I think they would be a lot more effective than just using those positions to gain even more authority and status. Yeah.
So bringing it down to street level, how do we grow as servant leaders? How do those of us, and we all have some sort of environment where we're like given say so. We all have to lead ourselves. We all have people that look to us for something, and whether it's just friends and we want to be an example or through our lives, or we have actual positions in work or wherever. How do we become great in Jesus's definition of greatness? How do you think that looks?
Yeah, I think practically speaking, like you said, you don't have to have a position to be a leader, and certainly not a servant. Like I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. said, everyone can be great because everyone can serve. And so you can lead in any area of influence you have just by serving really, really well. And so I think practically speaking, as a Christian, like you can just ask the Holy Spirit to open up opportunities to serve, and you could just simply pray, give me an opportunity to serve somebody today. And it can be as minor as you're at the mall and, everyone's seen someone drop their purse and everything flies everywhere on the floor and you're the first one there to help pick everything up. And like, that's a powerful moment for people because that a dozen other people just walk right by and ignore that person because they just don't care enough, but if you're willing to take the time to actually treat someone like a human, just ask the Holy Spirit for those opportunities. And then I would say the other thing you can do is like, you already have people in your life. Maybe you're married, maybe you have kids, maybe you have a boss, maybe you have employees. Like we all have some measure of relationships. It can be an awkward conversation and maybe even like a scary one, but just go to people in your life and say, how can I serve you better? And then listen, right? Like so many, like a lot of well-meaning people and a lot of well-meaning social services or well-meaning charities, like we make assumptions about what people need. And so we start an organization to serve these people. And you've heard so many stories about like, oh, we're giving away shoes in Africa and great, all these people are getting shoes, but now all the local businesses are out of business because you've given away free shoes and that was how they made money. And so you make assumptions and then it actually ends up hurting instead, right? So like when we just ask people like, what do you need? Like what's important to you? And again, people don't always know what their deepest needs are, but when you actually start to talk to them and get to know them and hear their story, you can dig in and then find a way to serve that person. So ask Holy Spirit for opportunities, ask the people in your life how you can serve them better. And then you just have to do something, right? You just have to take the opportunity, whether it's, our church is always looking for volunteers, right? So, and there's plenty of people that aren't serving and could. So find a spot, right? There's needs everywhere. I was talking to a firefighter just today, about how challenging his work is among the homeless population, overdoses, drug problems, like how challenging that is. There's needs everywhere. So find a place where you can serve and then give what you can give and trust God to continue to kind of like illuminate the path in front of you as he sees fit to give you other opportunities.
Yeah. And just as you're kind of wrapping it all up here, I'm just sensing this word of dignity, because to serve someone is to dignify them, right? I'm going to come under you and see you and care about your needs, even if socially or whatever, I'm like above you in the way the world sees things. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Absolutely. Like, have you ever washed someone's feet? It's like so undignifying for you personally, but I think such a powerful gesture to like both humble you and dignify somebody else. And Jesus, the Lord of all, did that. He washed the mud and probably feces from the streets off of his disciples' feet. And he had, I think that was at the end of his ministry, he had 24 hours to live. And so he, seeing all this in advance, there's that question, like, if you knew you're going to die tomorrow, what would you do? And most people would be like, I'm going to go skydiving, or I'm going to whatever, right? Jesus, knowing he had little time left to live, decided to wash his disciples' feet. Because again, that to him was the most potent thing he could do, to actually love the people that he came to serve. So, the belief in the universal image of God in every human being is a deeply Judeo-Christian view that has actually radically transformed human rights globally. And so
Wow.
carrying that in whatever we do, serving the least of these, let that empower you.
Yeah, that's a great spot to close on. Thanks, Dave.
My pleasure.
I'm inspired.
Now I got to go try to do this.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, I'm with you. Okay, well, thanks for the conversation.
What a pleasure. Thanks for the invite.